In this episode, we talk to Tammy Watchhorn about how using your change ninja skills, you can manage your life. It was great to talk to Dr. Tammy Watchhorn. She's a trained scientist before moving into the landscape of healthcare to lead change. I think we had an exclusive session with her today because Dale and Martin were away. But what a great topic. Really talking about the emotions of reacting versus responding, how to manage change, how to avoid negative bias. We covered so many different areas, how we think, and even threw in some future dystopian AI conversations, which was great. Tammy obviously knows her stuff, and she's got a great passion for this area around emotions and how to manage those on projects. So, guys, as usual, sit back and relax and join the pod. Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's good to have you with us. And we'll be doing it exclusively today with my old friend Tammy. Tammy from the North, I'm going to call you. How are you, Tammy?
I'm very well, thank you.
It's good to catch up. I had a good laugh with you actually just a minute ago about this new book of yours, and some of the inspiration, but also some of the crazy things you're doing up there, which I can't wait to get into. Tammy, let's get into this book first, because this book is it's a bit of a different pivot from your original release. And you mentioned we haven't caught up in a couple of years, which blows my mind as
Yeah.
well. But I'm looking forward to catching up in the next couple of weeks. What was the inspiration for this book?
So I'm just going to put a picture up of it. Look, Change Ninja Returns.
There it
So the
is.
first book, the
There it
Change
is.
Ninja Handbook, was around. It was a choose your own adventure of how to manage change and how to deal with people rather than the process. So focusing on all of the people that get in your way and how to approach them differently. It's done in a quite funny way. It's tale based. You might die if you make the wrong decision because it's a choose your own adventure book, but you learn as you go. And just as I was just finishing that book off, and I was planning this big sort of life change with my long-term partner, and we were going to buy a house in the country, and things were going really, really well. Don't gloat when things are going really well. And then something happened, and I had to end the relationship and decide what to do next. My whole life of 30 years had sort of changed overnight, and I didn't know what to do next. The temptation was to hide under the duvet. And then I thought, I'm a change ninja. So what would a change ninja do? So I thought, if this change stuff really does work, it's right telling people it works, but does it really work? So I decided to use all of my skills, knowledge in neuroscience that I teach, all the change tools that I have in my toolkit and my resources, and decided to treat my own life transformation as a massive change project. So I became my own case study. So the book is about my story and the tools that I used. And again, it's written in a very gamified way. So it's all about gaining new insight and learning as you read through the book.
That's fantastic. Well, first of all, it's very brave of you to share your story like that, Tammy. So well done. But also, um, to take your own medicine in a sense and use the techniques that are in the book to kind of prove that it works,
Yeah.
which is the ultimate evidence before you sell it to others. There's not a lot of books, I would say, in this space, particularly for people in projects, because we don't really talk a lot about maybe the stuff that happens on the inside instead of the stuff that happens on the outside. And I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of go down a path there with neuroscience. So you mentioned you've got some background in that space. What exactly is neuroscience, and what's your piece in that?
So, I mean, I do very light touch, but I think it's enough to understand what's going on. So, quite often when you're faced with challenges at work, you think people are being difficult on purpose, and they're probably not. But their brain, you've gone along with some change. Can you install this app on my phone? It'll take you 2 minutes. Their brain's gone through a whole thought process without any conscious thought and decided this could be quite bad for me. And so I'm going to say no. And that's happening in a, you don't know it's happening. It's basing it on all of the data that you have already in your brain, knowledge, experience. Do you know anything about this new app, what it's going to do, what it might lead to, what your boss might say? You don't have that knowledge. So your brain will say, we don't know about this. It could be dangerous. So let's say no. And it's sort of the ancient brain we have from running away from saber-toothed tigers. So we're all familiar with the fight and flight mechanism. And that's happening all the time when we're faced with change. The brain is making a very, very rapid assumption about this thing that's different. And if it doesn't know that it could be a good thing, it will assume it's a bad thing. It will predict a bad thing, much more likely than predict a good thing. And you're not conscious of this, and it drives your behaviors. Because if it predicts a bad thing, you get flooded with adrenaline. We all know that feeling in our stomach when it doesn't feel good, and the knot in your stomach, and the bit of cortisol that makes us feel, and that causes us to behave the way we do or feel the way we do. We quite often say panicked or anxious. Those are the feelings, those are the stories we've attached to the physical response that our brain's triggered. So the brain makes a decision, it triggers the adrenaline. We then go, we get the physical feeling, and then we attach the story to it. And more often than not, it will be a negative story. And so we respond. We might respond with anger, we might shut down, we might just be stubborn. And we're not necessarily conscious that we're doing it because it's so fast. And quite often when you're dealing with the changes at work and the people that are saying no to things, that's what's going on. So understanding that means you can A, not respond to it yourself, and B, you can try and avoid triggering someone to behave that way. So if you have the basics of what's going on physically with people and how that's triggering behaviors subconsciously, you can start to work in different ways. And so the book deals with much more about that, much more around the emotion. And we don't talk about the emotion. So we will deal with things professionally in the workplace. We might not react in the same way that we would at home if somebody's being difficult, but we'll still have the physical feelings, and it will still display in whatever we do. People will still be able to see that we're either anxious or we're a little bit withdrawn, or so even if we don't do that big outburst of anger or run down the corridor with the fear, it's still triggering behaviors and responses. So having that basic understanding can really help shift how you approach people and how you react yourself. Because you can, if you know it's happening, you can sort of hack your brain a little bit. You can stop it doing it. So yeah, there's just enough in there. It's not a huge science reference, but there's enough in there to be able to go, oh, that's what happens there, and that's why I do that, and that's how I could shift it.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of this behavior or these feelings could be unconscious. You might not even know they're happening. How do you raise the awareness? How do you become aware of your own feelings in that sense?
Well, you buy this book and read it. But the trick is to notice the physical feeling, because that will come first. The adrenaline will rush through your body. So imagine, let's do a little exercise. Can you imagine sitting on a little wooden bench, and it's really tight? There's people either side of you, and there's people opposite you. You're really crammed in, it's really claustrophobic, and you've got a boiler suit on, and you've got a big heavy rucksack on, so you're really hot and squished in, it's really noisy, and then somebody calls your name, and you open your eyes because you've had them closed all that time, and you're about to jump out of an aeroplane. How do you physically feel? So I do this as an exercise. What's going on for your, can you imagine that, and have you got any feelings?
Oh yeah, because I personally don't like being cramped. It reminds me of
Yeah.
like being on the
So
subway or something in London, you know. Um,
So what's
Aggravated, I
that
think, is
physical
the
feeling you've got? Yeah. So
agitated
what's
or
the
aggravated.
physical? Yeah. So you get in there, your
Mm,
stomach's maybe churning a bit, your heart's maybe racing, your palms are sweating. So I do this as an exercise because that means that's what the physical feeling is recognizing that my brain's been triggered as a fear response. And then you might say, I'm panicked, I don't like this, I feel claustrophobic. That's the story you've attached to it. So if you can start to recognize that churn, you can then start to do things to switch your nervous system around. You can start to calm your nervous system down with some basic breathing tools, which I put in the book, and you can do it really quickly. Because when that's triggered, your brain switches into the emotional state. And when you're in the emotional state, you behave and react emotionally. And when you're in the emotional state, your logic's switched off. So you can't respond logically. And people say, oh, you can. When I'm angered, I can be logical. But if you've ever been angry and someone's told you to calm down, what do? You don't calm down. Because you're in the emotional state, you just get more angry. So if your emotional state is triggered, you will respond emotionally. And the trick here is to notice the physical sensation, because then you can sort of spot it and do the breathing to switch it off so that you can remain logical. And we've all had those moments where we've reacted to something in a meeting, we're driving home later, and we think, oh, I should have just said that. That would have been a really smart response. And we can think of it later because the emotions calm down and the logic's come back on. But in the moment, we're responding emotionally. So the trick is to recognize that it's triggered. And the best way to do that is to recognize the feeling. Because as soon as the adrenaline starts rushing, you will start to attach emotions to it and it will trigger the emotional state. So if you can go, oh, this doesn't feel good. Okay, I'm going to do some breathing. I'm going to try and keep my logic on, and I'm going to try and approach this in a different way. It sounds quite simple, but it's quite hard to do because it's so fast, but you can do it. So it's notice the physical and then you can do something about it.
Yeah, is this something like I think I teach my kids this, is the difference between reacting and responding. Because I ex-defense and I used to do a lot of martial arts as well, and I think somewhere one of them taught me that there is a difference between reacting and responding. Is there something to that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're reacting, you don't necessarily have any control over it. It's a reaction to something. So if somebody is being really difficult, you're going to react to that possibly in a way that's not going to be helpful. Whereas if you can
Mm,
calm everything down, you can choose how you respond to it. It's about having the choice. Sometimes you might think, I don't care, I'm shouting at you, especially if it's the kids. But it's
yeah.
choosing that response. And if you can slow everything down to choose how you're going to respond, you're much more likely to get the outcome that you want. Because the
Hmm.
reaction very rarely gives you the outcome you want. Everyone just ends up upset and everyone ends up not doing anything. But if you can slow it down, you can choose what you do next. And that's the key bit.
Yeah, and I was going to say there are examples of that. You probably everybody's probably met someone in their career that's just super calm all the time, no matter what the pressure. And I remember reading some article, I think, around pressure in general. And you kind of had a good analogy there of being on the bus or being squashed. It certainly feels like that on projects sometimes when you've got lots of deliverables, there's lots of people to please, I guess, in a way. You've got your boss, you've got your client, you've got other departments. It can feel very pressurized in a project. Um, and you see some people just run super cool through that. I know probably in their head they're not, but how do you get to that status? You mentioned some breathing techniques, but is that the only thing you can do? Is there other ways to kind of build that resilience?
No, there's there's loads and loads of different tools in the book that take you through. So again, it's kind of scenario dependent. But if you think about all of these stresses that you've got you've got stakeholders, you've got finance, IT, you've got all of this stuff going on, and there's things external to that. You have no control over that. They're like external stresses. I think of them as lemons, and lemons pounding you in the face. So you have to think. Quite often we react to the stressor, trying to reduce the pain of it. So, for example, let's imagine there's a merger. Someone's announced a merger at work, and you have no detail. It's really uncertain. Most people will go and try and find out more information to make it a bit more certain. But there is no information because someone just decided it last night and has told everyone this morning. There's no thought behind it. So when you're focusing on the thing that's triggering you, you're focusing on the thing that's causing you pain, so it will get even more painful, particularly if you can't control it. You have no influence over that merger. You're not going to get the data you want. They're not going to tell you that your job's safe because they haven't worked through it yet. So it's like if you've got a sore tooth, the last thing you would do is just sit there and think, my tooth's really sore. You would distract yourself with a film or playing games or something. You'll try and distract yourself from the pain. And it's the same with stress at work. You need to recognize that you can't change the external stresses that are causing these feelings. And then you need to shift the environment around you so it's less painful. And the best way to do that is to focus on something else entirely. And if you focus on, and there's a model I use called SCARF. I don't want to go into it too much because it would take too long, but it's in the book. But it's around, okay, what's triggered just now out of these domains and what's not triggered? And I'm going to focus on the not triggered domain. And what you'll find is the stress reduces because you're no longer focusing on the thing and focusing on the thing that's worried you. You're doing something else, something different. It might still be in relation to the bigger thing, but it's different. And that will get you further along your path to where you want to go. And when you get to that bit, you'll realize that the thing wasn't that bad in the first place. So it's changing your environment. You can't decide what the stresses are, what are the impacts, and if you have no influence over it, don't spend your time on it because you have no influence over it. But think about what's the environment I'm in, how can I make the environment I'm in a little better, and using these tools to shift that and refocus and repurpose and do all of that. There's a team merger, just take the team out and go out and get, have a few beers or something. I don't know, but don't focus on that. We need to know all of this data to see if we're safe, because you're not going to get it, and B, you're focusing on the pain. So you need to do something to reduce the pain. And by the time you've come back in after your few beers, there might be more data anyway. Or you might all decide you're going to leave and set up your own business and, start the organisation. But you'll shift the environment. You'll shift the impact of those high pressure things that are there that you can't control.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you mentioned triggers, uncertainty, stresses. It reminds me of, thinking about mental health as well. And it's funny
Yeah.
because, well, it's not funny, but it's an interesting point of view because when we started out in projects, mental health was never mentioned at all, in fact. Things like work-life balance were never mentioned. Even working from home was a ridiculous context. So the world has vastly changed since we worked in projects, and I think now more than ever, mental health is at the top of the list because of the dramatic impact. Obviously, the stresses that you can't see all the time have on people and individuals. What is, I guess, your sense of the world? Maybe this needs more certainty as well in terms of data. Are we more stressed than we were, so say 10, 20 years ago? Or
Oh,
are the
absolutely.
stresses different and that's triggering different people? Yeah.
I don't have the evidence data. I've not collected it. But what's changed in the world? We're constantly being bombarded with fear messages. Whether you believe what's going on in the world or not, it kind of doesn't matter. The messages out there, the COVID, the global warming, the depopulation, the overpopulation. There's so much conflicting evidence, but it's all really negative. So that's going on all the time. And we're just living in that world. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the UK, just the cost of living has dramatically increased. Everything's so expensive. It's not a good environment just now. So you've got all of that going on. Then there's a bit where we've moved to working at home a lot of the time, and that's increased the number of meetings everyone's having. Because it's the only way to talk. So instead of just picking up the phone, we'll say, let's have a meeting, and we better not leave Bill and Jim out because they complained last time. So, a 5-minute conversation becomes an hour meeting with 6 people where only 2 people talk. People are going to meetings because they don't want to be left out, but then they don't have time to do their job because they spend all the time in meetings. And there is some research on this. It's called Zoom fatigue, because our brains aren't meant to be looking at faces all day. We're not designed to look at a sea of faces. And our brains perceive, when you're on those calls with 20 people in a gallery, the brain is seeing 19 potential enemies. Your predators, everyone that you're looking at is a predator. So you're looking at this sea of potential predators. I mean, you obviously don't think that, but your brain does, because it's not designed to look at a sea of faces. If you're in a meeting, you're looking at the person you're talking to or the person who's talking. You don't look at multiple faces at the same time. And the other thing is you're looking at yourself unless you've switched your camera off. And we're not used to looking at ourselves all day. So not only are you trying to pay attention in this meeting while there's all of these predators about to eat you, but you're checking if your hair looks okay, and it doesn't, because it never does. So you've got all of that a brain's not designed to do, on top of the constant level of fear that's being bombarded with us, whatever social media news items you look at. It's all really negative. There's never any good news. And so, yeah, I think there's just all of that we're coping with all the time, probably without giving it much conscious thought, but it's triggering us. So I think the difference between that trigger point of when you send people over the edge, when mental health becomes a real issue, is the line's much closer. So I think a lot of people are living quite close to it because of the way we live our lives, and the way, and we all know social media is not good, and being on your phone and all, but it's it's habits we've all got, and it's really hard to break those habits. So I think there's a lot
So how
of
does
external stress that we're not conscious of.
yeah, and how I guess the word emotional intelligence used to go. I mean, I remember I did a 2-day course on this, Tammy, when I was younger. We all walked out there pretty enlightened. But then about 2 weeks later, all the managers turned back into the horrible managers that we had. But we were obviously pretty elated to have a 2-week break because because everyone got through the course. But I do think there is something to that. Is emotional intelligence another way of saying this, or has that morphed and evolved as well into something else? What's your view?
I don't know. I mean, there's fads of things, isn't there, that we, everyone goes on a certain amount of training. There's certain things that everyone must do or that are really good to do. And I think they all have their place if they change something. But I think, I don't know if I mentioned it in the book, but I do talk about it in the course. You can't change other people. You can only change yourself. So for me, it doesn't matter what it is you do, but if you recognize that you need to shift for you. So some people say to me about the tools that I use, that they feel like they're giving in, because they're almost giving in to this difficult person by treating them in a different way and allowing them to get away with what they're doing rather than reacting, if that makes sense. So, you want to put up the fight when someone's being a pain in the backside. You want them to know that they're being a pain in the backside. And the tools that I teach and the way that I approach would be to not challenge them, because you're not going to get anywhere. So it almost feels like you're giving in. But if you do it, you'll get the outcome you want, and you'll feel much better. So it's recognizing that it's not about the battle with other people, it's the battle with yourself. And I want to have a much healthier mindset and, be that chill person that just whistles down the corridor and, everything falls off my back and nothing's sort of sticking in terms of those negative behaviors and the stress and all of that. So you have to find the way to do that yourself, and that shift. So the first step is recognizing that, and then find the thing that will work for you. How do you stay calm? How do you stop reacting and choose to respond? And how do you tell your story and the story that you want to tell? Because a lot of the negativity and the difficulty in projects and in life is around the story you've associated, like I said at the start. So if you decide someone's really difficult and you've got a meeting with that difficult person, you're going to go in ready for battle. And they're going to know you're going in ready for battle, and you're going to know they're being difficult. So you've already all got your guards up, and it's not going to get you anywhere. But if you decide that person's not really difficult, they've perhaps just got some stuff going on at home, or perhaps they just really don't understand it and they're just a little bit nervous about what you're trying to do because it's going to change their role, it's going to change their job, and they're not sure of that, then you'll approach them in a very different way and you won't be ready for battle. You'll be much more relaxed. And they'll notice that. Even if it's subconscious, they'll notice it. So they'll start to respond differently and get a bit more curious. So you'll get to the outcome you want much more quickly and much more easily, but you won't have stressed yourself out. So it's, if you can do that and go, right, I'm not going to try and change everyone else and send them on a course. I'm going to try and change how I respond and choose the stories that I tell and reframe things in a different way, so that a lot of that stuff that really makes me quite anxious just isn't there anymore. It's quite
Yeah, it doesn't help when
easy. It's
we're
quite simple to do, but it's not easy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, when you say this, I was thinking the exact thing. And it probably doesn't help that we're fueled by coffee and other things that make us super alert and anxious. I wanted to get to your point
Well,
around being right. Do we have to be right all the time? We fight a lot in projects, I feel, and some discourse is good because debate is healthy. But why do we do that? What's the underlying root cause of that, Tammy? Why do we have to be right all the time?
it's really hard to accept you're wrong. So Eddie always teaches, what's the line he teaches is like, what does it feel like to be wrong? So I'm asking you this question. What does it feel like to be wrong?
Oh, it sucks.
Yeah,
But
no,
whether you admit it
it
or not,
sucks. Yeah. It sucks when you know you're wrong. When it doesn't, but feel the feeling of wrong is the same as feeling right, because it's only when you know you're wrong that it sucks. Until
mm,
then, it feels exactly the same as being right. So if you've got two people in a room and one is right and one is wrong, the wrong person doesn't know they're wrong. So it doesn't feel bad because they think they're right. Everyone thinks they're right. So the feeling of being wrong is the same as the feeling of feeling right. It's only when you know you're wrong that you get the bad feeling. So that's going on in these discourses. Nobody thinks that they're wrong because nobody's sitting there feeling bad. So they're making their point. So there isn't always a right answer. Most things are black and white.
mm.
And the trick is, if there's lots of disagreement, is to try and manage the space so that the logic stays on and people don't switch into the emotional and start battling their corner. So facilitating that conversation in a way that's not triggering everybody to jump into an emotional response, but to ask questions. So how might we change that? And what was different last time? And how could we use your knowledge? So keeping this, I call it growth mind. Well, I don't call it, it is growth mindset, but how do you facilitate that conversation? Because everybody feels like they're right, even if they're wrong, because because they don't know they're wrong.
Hmm.
And often there isn't a black and white. So it's trying to keep that logical discourse and not trip people into the emotional reaction, which again sounds quite simple, but it's really really hard to do because you might be triggered as well.
I imagine because we've been talking about the self a lot, responding and reacting to your own stresses and uncertainty and triggers, etc. Um, you might have everything under control if you're listening to this and say, "Well, this doesn't really suit me because I'm quite calm and collected." But I want to know some tools to effectively maybe de-escalate or maybe help someone else who may not have these tools. Um, Other than purchasing your book, Tammy, what can they do to kind of de-escalate other people in a meeting call and deal with emotion in a meeting room?
So I think if you've got this sus, and most people have it some of the time and not all of the time. So don't assume that you're 100% cool all of the time, because there will be things, and you can learn from that. It's not, it's not a weakness. It's actually a really strong learning point. If you can learn what triggers you to react rather than respond, then that becomes a really good learning point. Your next. So the first task is understanding yourself and your responses and triggers and shifting that, because that will make it much better for you and you're much more likely to succeed in what you're doing. The next thing is to understand that every time you ask someone to do something, you might be triggering them. So understanding before you go along to someone. So the IT guy, could you just download this app? It'll only take you 5 minutes. Could be triggering loads and loads of things. Instead of saying, going along, how are you? Being quite pleasant. We quite often miss out the niceties. Talk about that thing that you worked with this guy on 3 years ago. Do you remember that project? It was really good and you got loads of kudos and we did this and blah, blah, blah. Well, I've got this other one and it's a bit like that. So make it familiar. How do you make something familiar? So the brain's going, oh, yeah, that was good. And oh, if it's like that, then it'll be good this time as well. And so because it's got data on it, and then say if we do it that way, and it won't take very long, and we can showcase it to your boss, and I know there's that promotion you're interested in, so it could really help with that. So you're making them have their brains think growth mindset. There's some good outcomes. I can do this in steps. There's going to be some reward. So if you've mastered this for yourself, your next challenge, and it's the biggest challenge, is to then not trigger anyone else. Assume everyone else is scared by everything and think about how you're going to approach them either as individuals or as a group before you go anywhere near them. Make it familiar, introduce the growth mindset words. There's loads of that online if you want to look it up. Changing the words, but for and. A lot of people say but that, if someone says that'll never work, but we're going to do it differently this time, you're switching their brains off. They're not listening anymore. Whatever you do, don't go in and tell them the benefits of your change. Because if their brain has decided this is bad for them, they're not listening. It's like telling them to calm down when they're angry. They don't care. It might be the best project ever with the biggest benefits ever. If their brain has decided this might be bad for them, they don't care about the benefits. So don't keep telling them the benefits, but try and find out what their issues are and how you can help fix their issues and how this project is going to fix their issues. So you need to find that nugget that will sell it to them, persuade them in a brain-friendly way. And that's the hard bit. That's the change ninja bit.
So I've been on a few courses, Tammy, that teach you different things, whether it's leadership or whether it's managing emotions or thinking on your feet or negotiations and influence. And I cannot recall. I think this is from a book rather than a course, but I remember very explicitly learning this technique around matching people's energy. So I don't know where it comes from, but it was something around, and I want to know if this is a factual thing or if I just made this up. But it's something around if someone's quite loud in volume, or there's a particular tonality. There was something around matching or mirroring them, even if you're not being negative, but starting at the same level as they are, and then kind of bringing it down to a calmer, more responsive thing. And I actually just thinking about it, I think I've done this with my kids many times, but it works to kind of at least maybe validate their experience before then telling them to calm down, if you know what I mean. So is there some fact behind that as well?
Yeah, I can't remember where it comes from. We've got a tool called Match Based Lead, and it's based on a big bit of research. I can't remember the author, but yeah, so it's a classic. I think it's been around for a long time as a trick. But if you're sitting in front of someone and they're talking loudly, you just match them, and you just copy them. If they've got the legs crossed, cross the legs. If they uncross them again, just copy them. And then what you can do is, because they're subconsciously, they've accepted you. You're no longer a threat to them because you're copying them. And then you try and set the pace. So what you could do then is you cross your legs a different way, or you put your hands behind, or you start clicking your pen, and you wait until they start copying you. They won't know they're doing it. And then you can start to set the pace. And if they don't do it, then just keep copying them until they do it. So this is the thing we don't ever get taught. Your subconscious brain is doing loads of stuff that you're not aware of. So, if you're calm and you're with someone who's quite anxious, they'll pick up on your calmness and vice versa. So we pick up on all of that stuff without noticing it. So you follow them and then you try and get them to follow you. And once you've got them, once they're following you, then you can take the lead. So it might be you're trying to calm it down or quieten it down or start to think about, whatever it is, but just keep copying them. And their brains will start to say, you are no longer a threat. And then they'll start to copy you at some point because you're now a pal. And then you've got them in that brain-friendly space. So I talk about brain-friendly space, so, not the trigger, the adrenaline, the threat, the fear, all of that stuff. The brain-friendly. They'll be much more open to talking. So yeah, I can't remember the original author, but absolutely works.
Yeah, I think it was something around a girl in retail dealing with customer complaints, something like that, where it can get pretty fiery. Think of an airline, your flight's been cancelled, that kind of thing, and you're dealing with someone who's obviously very emotional because they can't get home. I've actually seen this at airports many, many times, and I'm surprised how calm they are. But it doesn't seem to work unless they kind of meet that same level of energy, perhaps. But yeah, that's great to hear that there's some real life techniques out there. I did also learn some stuff around neuro-linguistic programs. So I really love this neuroscience piece because I think, as you said, there is a lot going on that we don't actually take for granted. And I think it's because our attention window is very limited versus our kind of
Yeah.
non-attention because there's so much getting bombarded at us. Um, but you mentioned as well, mastering kind of ourself first is the first step, and then obviously you can help others with their challenges. What about and I see this rising with younger kids probably than we did when I was younger myself, is this neurodivergence that we have a lot of people out there with different types of attention spans and capabilities and restrictions perhaps on how they kind of process information or process reality. I find it a bit challenging sometimes personally dealing with people who are neurodivergent because they can be, and I don't think they mean this, and I can be like this as well apparently, is be quite short. So they skip the chit chat, even though that helps kind of lubricate the conversation. They kind of want to just get to the facts. And how do you deal with people with different types of personalities or different divergences that kind of come all together? Because when you're trying to wrangle a team, as projects do, it can be very, very challenging, can't it?
It can. So I think for me, it's important that you assume everybody that you're working with and stakeholders are all human. And every single human on the planet is different. They have different thoughts, different beliefs, different preferences, different opinions. So yes, there is the neurodivergent thing, and we're much more aware of it now. So they someone's quite short and they don't do the pleasantries. Previously, that you'd have thought they were rude. Now you just know it's. So for me, it's just everyone's different and everyone's unique. So you need to find a way to meet people's needs that are actual needs. Um, I think we can sometimes assume what those. Yeah, we could get into a whole topic there. I've got lots to say on that because I have done quite a lot of research on it. But I think just assume everybody's different and everybody has different needs. If somebody's short to you, well, let's take a home example because I use this quite a lot. The dishwasher always comes up when we talk about issues at home. It just seems to be one of those problems that everybody has. Somebody loads the dishwasher really well, somebody doesn't. The person who loads it really well gets really angry at the person. Why can't you just learn to load the dishwasher properly? So I think this is a good example because it's sort of a universal one. And I just say, well, does it really matter? So does it really matter if that person hasn't said good morning to you and you know they're not being intentionally rude? So some of this I think has to come back to you and what am I going to react to? I can choose what I react and respond. Do I really need to let that person know that they've stacked the dishwasher badly again? Or should I just be grateful that they've stacked the dishwasher and I don't have to, even though I'm going to have to do another load in the morning? So for me, it's coming back to when you want to react, does it matter? And can I respond in a different way? And when you've got a team of people, it doesn't matter if they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, they've all got their own ways of doing things. So it's like, does
Mm.
this matter? And I think sometimes we get quite focused on job descriptions. So that's not my job, it's their job. But if you've got a team and you've got some tasks to do, who's the best person to do all of the tasks? Because some people would prefer some types of tasks and some people would prefer other. Some people will like going to meetings with stakeholders. Some people want to sit at home playing with a spreadsheet. So, think about how you would, what kind of project is it? What are the big tasks? Who's best to do it or who wants to do it? And just be a bit more flexible around that. If people don't want to come to a team meeting and they really don't have to be there, why would you force them to be there? So I think it's just being considerate of differences as long as someone's, doing what they need to do job wise. I think we get a bit too one size fits all. We all need to be in the office on a Wednesday. Do we?
Yeah.
Jim really doesn't want to
Well,
come to the office. Why are we forcing him in?
that is actually that's something that's actually really current in the news, isn't it, Tammy? The bringing people back from work from home campaign. You're seeing Amazon, Google, Facebook, other big companies are doing it. Law firms are doing it, and actually, enforcing it quite strongly. And there is a bit of pushback because since COVID, we've all kind of built our own stations at
Yeah.
home, and if you've got a strong internet connection, then you're ready to go for I would say 70 to 80% of the tasks. There is a little bit of trade-off with that, isn't there, with the Zoom fatigue, as you mentioned. But we do find, I think, a lot more people prefer a mix of both and kind of have a bit more control over their own destiny for the week. That makes sense to them. Is that what do you think the value is in, because we are pressurized in coming to work or not coming to work?
I think if there's genuine value of everybody being in an office and you've got something that everyone in the office is going to do together as a team, then it makes sense. But if you're just telling people they need to be in the office on a Wednesday and then everyone sits on a Zoom call anyway, then what's the point? So it's back
Mm,
to thinking about it's not a black and white thing, but why do we? And some people want to be working in an office. For some people, that's a preference. They don't want to be at home. But if you start to mandate these things, you start to lose goodwill, you start to alienate people, good people will leave. So there has to be a purpose to it. It's not just real estate's dropped through, and I think a lot of it is to do with real estate because there's all of these empty buildings that people are paying a lot of money for.
mm,
I don't think anyone's, well, very few people are doing it because productivity's dropped, because it hasn't. So if you're going to do it, have a team day once a month. You come in, do some learning, you do some sharing, you go out for lunch. Great. But forcing people to come into an office to sit at a desk on a computer when they're probably going to be mostly video calling still anyway just seems like a very
mm.
futile exercise unless people want to be in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does mention some of these articles do mention productivity, and as you said before, sometimes it is worth just sitting around the water cooler and having a 5 minute conversation instead of a Teams or a Zoom call with 15 people on it. So there are some advantages being closer to
Well,
humans, and I always
yeah, there are, but you have a choice. And this is the thing: people say, "I'm in meetings all day." I was like, "Well, why are you going? What's going to happen if you don't
yeah.
go to the meeting?" So it's back to personal choice and it's back to personal decision making. And we've outsourced it. And it's like, well, if I don't go, I won't find out what's happening. I says, well, why don't you ask somebody else who's going to tell you what happened? Or if I don't go, my boss might get angry. Why don't you tell your boss that you've got some work to do and you don't want to be at this meeting and see if you don't? So, there's a bit of personal choice comes into this. And people
Mm,
do have the ability to make decisions on what they do and don't do. Some people, you said follow the energy. Some people work really early. Some people get their mojo at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and will work through till 10. So why would you bring them into an office 9 to 5 when they're just going to get going and they're going to go home again? And so the productivity thing, I think, I don't think there's any data to say that companies are less productive because they're not in the office. I don't think there is. And if there is a productivity issue, then it's a management issue because people aren't doing the job. So manage the people better. They're just gonna sit on the internet at work in the office if they're doing it at home.
mm. Well, this brings me to another question that I had for you is around high performing teams, which is another kind of catchphrase from management. What does that mean exactly? Um, in terms of the emotional response, the burnout tends to happen from these teams, and it's very real, and it have pretty dire consequences. There's an article about a girl who passed away who was at EY. She passed away from dying, and this is very common in some cultures. How do we reframe that conversation around high performance to make sure that we make way for personal choice and emotional kind of stability?
I don't know. I think that's a hard one because it depends on what industry you're in, and I don't know how you reframe it, but I think reframe is the good question. It's like, how do we reframe a lot of this? And I think that comes to some degree from individuals and individuals doing it with other individuals. And again, not outsourcing it to somebody up above who's going to mandate something without any thought. There is power in that sort of collective approach. So if we all decide that we're not going to have 3-hour team meetings every week, we'll just not have them. Does anyone who's gonna tell us off for not doing it?
Mm,
Um, how do we want to spend our time? How do we want to best use our energy that we've got for work? And having those discussions in smaller teams, because there isn't a one size fits all. It depends what you're doing. It depends on the industry. So I think it's conversations that most people should be having, but not assuming that it's going to come from the top and they're going to be told that it's going to change.
yeah.
Because I think we have a lot more power than we possibly make use of.
What do you mean by that, Tammy?
I think there's a lot more things we could choose in the workplace for ourselves and get away with. There's that balance. You don't want to be disruptive for the sake of it. You don't want to be seen as the troublemaker. But there's a lot you could do that would give you back your time, would give you back your energy, and through I'm not going to those meetings because I don't add value to them. I'm not making any decisions. I can find out the information from them, so why would I sit through them for 3 hours when I could be getting on with my job? Some
Yeah.
of the valueless tasks that we do, how could I do it so it takes 2 minutes instead of 2 hours? Because nobody's going to check it anyway because it's valueless. I think my favorite one on that was when I was in the health service. I was given a KPI because I was head of innovation, the number of ideas the organization had in a month. And I was like, that's a waste of time. And they're like, no, this is the KPI and you will collect it and it will be green. And I said, okay, what's your target? And my boss said, 20 seems like a good number. Okay. And it was always green because I have 20 ideas in the shower in the morning. She didn't want to know who had come up with the ideas or how good the ideas were. She just wanted 20 ideas a month. So it was always
Mm,
green. So, I could have argued it and I could have spent hours trying to collect ideas from people to put in a spreadsheet that no one was ever going to read. And I was just like, it's nonsense. So green
mm.
it is. She was happy. The chief exec was happy because we were having all of these ideas. Nobody cared what they were. So it's, we
Yeah.
all have we all have the ability to change some of that stuff. And there's still all the other things, but it frees up a bit of time. It frees up some energy. It gives you back some of that control. And I think you said that earlier, how people like to have control over their week. So why would you take that away from them if they're doing the job, let them control it how they want to do it as long as they're performing.
Yeah, there's something to this empowering the individual, and I want to know your points on technology. So we've seen various things being bombarded. Now, the latest hyperbole is around AI and what AI can
Mm.
do. And that there was a funny argument online not too long ago. Some of them are funny anyway, Tammy, around every time someone says it's going to make it easier, we end up working twice as hard. And they said the same thing about the computer and the internet. It was going to make our lives so much more easier. The mobile phone, it was going to make our lives less distracting, more focused, more efficient, more productive. But in fact, we're working just as long as we've ever done, probably more so. It's been harder on people. We're stressed more, not less. So I kind of take all of that in when I think about this AI bubble that is fastly approaching, and some of the technology is pretty amazing, and I'm excited to use it and apply it. But in the same instance, I'm like, what does this mean to the human condition in a negative sense as well? Because I think we need to balance the conversation. But what's your view on this, Tammy?
I think, I don't know. I don't know. I've sort of avoided it because, I write and I can chuck some words into AI and it'll come out with a Change Ninja chapter. And I think I could do marketing that way. And I just think I don't want to, because for me, the enjoyment comes from the creative process. And I think humans are creative, so I think they will always, if it can save time doing X, Y, and Z that's pointless and valueless and we don't enjoy, that's great. But I think we'll battle it in the way that we want to. Um, I don't think there's a huge fear for the workplace, because most of our most of what we do is just work about work. It's the Dave what's his face essay, bullshit job stuff. If you really look at how much of your time is spent doing the good thing that you're doing and how much is spent filling in forms and filling in systems, and yeah, you need some of that stuff. But so if the AI gets rid of that, if the AI does updates your risk register and writes your highlight report that no one's interested in reading, great. But I think I don't think AI is going to be creative anytime soon. And I think humans are creative by nature, so they'll find their own
Mm.
thing. We'll find our own way through it. I don't think it's going to get rid of jobs and save us all. We're not all going to be
Well,
sitting with our feet up drinking cocktails.
could it help us in the sense that, and this is where I think Microsoft have gone with Copilot, which is a great name, I think, for the actual intent of AI, is to kind of be this personal assistant that you have, Tammy, that maybe you're having a bad day. Could they be the tool that helps mental fatigue and mental health by being there for people when and when no one's around? Because a lot of the time, um, the battle that people have is behind closed doors. It's after work's finished. It's when you're alone, and these negative thoughts creep in. Could AI be a helpful assistance in that space?
Oh, that's a good one. There's a few films about that, isn't there?
There are a
What's the
few. There'll be a
film
lot
with
more, I'm sure. Yeah.
yeah, what's the film with the chat, he gets a girlfriend, and she turns out to
Oh,
be AI. I can't
Joaquin
remember what it's
Phoenix.
called.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah,
I think it's called
yeah,
Her or something like that. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Possibly, yes. I mean, I know there's been apps for years that support people in camps, asylum camps, that they can just access quite easily on the phone, and it's mostly bot driven, but it's giving them something to talk to that's sounds human. So that stuff's been around for a while. Uh, Yes, it could, but shouldn't we really be trying to shift away from that and actually go? I think we're going to go back to small communities and small societies where we're much more connected to other humans. And we've sort of lost our way with that. We live in big cities, and which is why I moved to the country a couple of years ago. And absolutely night and day. I lived in a small city, but night and day in terms of feeling connected to a community and the support that goes with that and all the things that go on. And I suspect a lot of people are going to want to go back to that to some degree if they can. And AI might
Well,
allow that to happen more easily.
yeah. As long as it's done in the right way. So there's this conversation happening, not in Australia, but in other parts of the region, uh, around 15-minute cities. Everything at your fingertips, kind of. That's their view of a small community. Whereas I think what you're saying is you're out there in the woods with a small number of people, but you still got
With
to
an
fend for
axe.
yourself. With an axe, some independence still
Yeah,
left. Not completely
chasing down the
controlled by
deer.
machines. Um, I think there is a concern that we will get boxed in by technology if we're not careful, because it makes it very easy
And,
for governments and people who want to control the systems
yeah,
to
yeah,
to kind
and
of make us
yeah,
isolated. Yeah.
and I think 15-minute cities could do that. It could be more around control than actual choice. Because
Yeah.
if you can't drive your car into the next suburb, then you have to shop in the shops that are. So that's going back to when you worked down the mines, and the only place to shop was the mine-owned shop. So that could there's an argument for it could be good. There's an argument that it could be bad, and it's actually more about control again. So I think we're humans, and humans do bad stuff, but humans always work it out and find a way. So I think it could be
Mm.
quite interesting what happens next.
Well,
But I would
I
advocate for
talked to my
going and living
grandmother a
in the
lot.
woods. And
Yeah, yeah. Look,
sorry,
I come from the country as well, and I talk to my grandmother a lot about this stuff because she's completely void of technology, and she's almost 90 now. So having a chat to her about all of this stuff, she's just, oh, it all doesn't make sense. Um, but in her mind, all change in this sense is negative, and I'm wondering what is the positive? Are we potentially biased towards machines because we think they can't do what we do? When I think in actual fact, their level of reasoning within a short period of time is phenomenal. And you can only predict in the next 10, 20 years, perhaps your children or your children's children are going to have quite a different experience with robots. Um, and so we're kind of on this trajectory towards a world that we probably won't recognize, Tammy. You and I, in 50, 100 years, we probably won't be around, but maybe we will because of advancements. How do people then prepare themselves? Because you mentioned, I think before we press record, actually, anxiety. We didn't actually cover this very well. But as I kind of understand it, anxiety is about things that have yet to happen. What is, first of all, what is
yeah.
your definition of anxiety, and secondly, how do we deal with that kind of level of pressure or stress?
So I think you're right. It's about things that haven't yet happened, and our brain is predicting it will be a bad outcome. So it doesn't have the data to suggest it's going to be good. And even, I mean, even if you think about something that you want to do that's a big change. So, you want to move from the city to the country. You've been imagining it for ages. If you've never done it, you have no data to say it's going to work out. So you'll still be anxious about that move, even though you want to do it. So the doubts get in the way quite a lot, and your brain will fill your head with lots and lots of doubts of why you shouldn't do something, because it can imagine what can go wrong because you have data on that. It can't imagine how it's going to feel. If you decide that you want to go and live in France when you retire, you can't actually imagine what it's going to feel like. So you can't, because you've not done it before. So it's really hard to predict that it's going to be good because you can't, even though you want to do it, and it'll be really exciting. So the anxiety comes from that, and you have to battle it. You have to recognize it. You have to recognize those doubts are just really difficult stakeholders. It's really hard to battle your own brain, but they're not real. They're just thoughts in your head. So the second thing is they're difficult stakeholders. The first thing, difficult stakeholders. Second thing is they're just thoughts and they're not real. You've just made them up, so you need to shift them. How do you shift them? You change the narrative, or treat it as, okay, this is a risk. What is the risk of moving from the city to the country? I don't know anyone. I'm going to feel isolated. So how do I manage that risk? And start to give yourself data around it so that you can start to mitigate and reduce the level of doubt that there is. So recognizing that is key, and it's really hard to do, but it will reduce the anxiety. And sometimes you just have to face fear. But again, if you reframe it, what's the worst that can happen? Or have a backup plan like you would with a big risk at work. But reframing it can really help to reduce it as well. Retell the story in a different way. And I think we can do that
Mm.
with lots of things in life that just reduce that level of anxiety. So people get really fearful about AI. Some people will get excited. We can imagine how it's all going to go wrong because we've seen the films, but we haven't seen many films where it's all gone really well, because that would be a really boring film. Some AI comes along and everyone's happy. No one's going to watch it. But we have plenty of data from the films and the books of the dystopian future. So we automatically will assume that's going to happen when we don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I worry about the fact that a robot or an AI entity could watch the same films and have an inspiration moment, which is another dystopian view, if you ask me. But I wanted to get onto the last thing around training, because I think a lot of people listening to this today, they're like, Tammy's obviously got a big brain. How do I certify myself? And I know there's some change courses out there, but it's not really pushed that we should be practicing getting comfortable with change and becoming self-aware. It's very seldom that you do these types of courses unless you get to the level of leadership. You generally do a 2-day course and then you're certified. But how do people, what resources do they have, Tammy, out there?
So there's 2 very good books, which I'm going to hold up. And there's not a lot. So I've got a training course that goes with the book, which focuses on the neuroscience and then how to manage all of that. I've got sessions that go with the second book, which are a bit more around personal change. So I recently ran a how to beat the world of internet dating course, which we had people there that were interested in data. But we had people that wanted to change their jobs and careers, because the tools that I teach all apply to any kind of change. We're hopefully going to get the course accredited as well, so we'll be able to start getting
Oh, wow.
trainer type things out there. But there's not a huge amount. There is some change management stuff on neuroscience, but it's very much about the science. So I haven't come across anything yet which is practical. So come along, I'm going to tell you some stuff. This is the tool to use. Where's your challenge? Let's apply the tool to your challenge. There's your answer. So I haven't come across anything else that is very, very practical. And I get immediate results because we're doing it on real things. So if you come to me and say, my biggest challenge is my husband stacks the dishwasher wrong, we'll fix it in the course.
Mm-hmm.
It will never be an issue again. I did a workshop recently, and someone wanted a new car, and her husband was a mechanic and says, I can fix your car. So I taught her how to persuade him that she needed a new car. She's now got a new car. So the
Fantastic.
tools work. And it wasn't a vanity. She wanted a new car for safety. But she was approaching it the wrong way. So I don't know any other practical courses. I would love to give you a list of alternatives, but I don't know any. So it's just me just now, but it will get scaled up hopefully in the next year.
Well, I'll do a little plug for. There's always Project Chatter podcast where we do explore the ideas at least for a little bit, and it's great to have you back, Tammy. An hour has gone relatively quickly. Would you believe it?
It has.
But I love talking about this stuff because we don't do it enough. But any final thoughts for our listeners, Tammy, before we finish up?
I think just notice how you feel when somebody says something you don't like, and try not to react. Try to calm yourself down with a bit of breathing, think about your response and reframing it. So just keep reframing the story. Tell the story how you want to tell it, not how everyone's telling you to tell it.
Great stuff. Well, Tammy, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been great to have exclusive access as well without Dale and Martin here to bother me. So I've managed to maintain my emotional intelligence. But folks, that's all we have for tonight. If you like our show and you like the episodes, please pay it forward, share and like. We hope to see you at the next one. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.